We'll try and make a start on time, which would be great. Thank you so much. If everyone can take their seats. Beautiful. Alrighty, well, let's kick off. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Connect Unlocking Productivity. It is absolutely wonderful to see so many members, chairs, partners, and guests here in Sydney today. Productivity has moved well beyond the language of economists and government reports. It now firmly is a CEO and boardroom issue because it sits at the intersection of almost everything leaders are wrestling with: growth, cost, talent, technology, AI, regulation, execution, and their own well-being. It was one of the clearest issues raised through our CEO Summit back in January, and it continues to feature predominantly in our syndicate rooms and conversations with you, our members. So that is why we are here today. Not simply to talk about productivity as a number, but to examine what it actually is happening inside our organizations and how we can unlock it. At a national level, productivity is measured through output, hours worked, and ultimately living standards. But inside an organization, I think we experience it slightly differently. We experience it as capacity, the ability to turn time, talent, technology, and judgment into value. And increasingly, the constraint is not simply workforce capacity, it's leadership capacity. The capacity to think clearly, to make good decisions, to establish priorities, and to absorb change. And most importantly, to give others the confidence and authority to act. Because the central issue here is not effort. Our people are already working hard enough. The challenge is effectively how that effort is being converted into progress. And there's going to be plenty of research that you will hear today showing that people can understand the strategy of your business, but the majority of them don't necessarily see how their work aligns to that strategy. So that, again, is not an effort gap, and it's not necessarily a communication gap, it's a conversion gap. So what's changed? Well, I want to address something up front, which I suspect a few of you may think throughout the day, or may be thinking already. Because today you're going to hear conversations about wasted time, wasted processes, too many meetings, prioritization, systems, and automation, and think, well, I was dealing with this 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And the answer to that is yes, you probably were. But the environment in which those problems exist has changed fundamentally. 20 or 30 years ago, when demand increased, organizations could often solve it by just adding capacity, adding another person, another assistant, another admin function, another management layer. So that wasn't necessarily efficient, but it was possible. But today, work is far more interconnected. Organizations are more regulated, technology stacks are more fragmented, skills are scarcer, labor is more expensive, and teams are distributed. Decisions across more functions, and our people are already absorbing extraordinary levels of change. And then on top of that, we add AI. So for the first time, we have technology that can not only complete work faster, but it can create work faster. More analysis, another report, another presentation, another idea, another request, another option for somebody to have to consider. So AI can remove work, but it also can create extraordinary amounts of new activity. And that changes the productivity equation. The old challenge was how to process more work. The new challenge is deciding which work should exist at all, and that is a very different leadership problem. Think about how rigorously organizations allocate capital. Investments are challenged, business cases are tested, headcount is approved, and technology spend is scrutinized. Yet work itself can enter an organization remarkably easy. Somebody has an idea, a customer asks for something new, a board member wants a different report, an executive launches a new initiative, and a regulation comes in to create another process. And every piece of that work consumes capacity. So perhaps work is one of the few corporate investments that we still do not govern with the same discipline as we do with capital. And that gives us a very simple leadership question. When something new starts, what do we stop? Because if nothing ever stops, then eventually everything becomes a priority. And if everything is a priority, well, then nothing actually is. So one idea I would encourage you to test today: no new priority without a stop decision. Now, that's not because organizations should stop innovating, quite the opposite. because capacity released from low-value work can then be reinvested into growth, into your customers, into capability, innovation, and to the work that actually genuinely matters. And that, for me, is one of the most important differences between the productivity conversations we may have had 20 years ago and the one we're going to have today. We also need to distinguish activity from value. A full calendar can look productive. A business can generate enormous volumes of reports, meetings, approvals, and communication, and still move remarkably slow. Work can get trapped between strategy and execution. Decisions wait, priorities compete, systems create workarounds. People spend increasing amounts of time coordinating the work rather than actually advancing it. And because everybody remains busy, it becomes very easy to mistake movement for progress, because a business moving is not necessarily a business moving forward. Now, that doesn't mean that friction is bad, because some friction protects quality, some challenges assumption, and some improves judgment. The leadership task is determining the difference between productive tension and avoidable drag. Now, technology will clearly be central to today's answer, and AI will be central to that answer, but neither is the silver bullet. AI amplifies the environment in which we introduce it to. Put it into a well-designed work, and it can remove drudgery, improve decisions, and release enormous amounts of capacity. Put it into confused priorities, fragmented systems, and poorly designed processes, and we may simply be making things work faster that are already the wrong things. And as information becomes abundant, I would argue that human judgment becomes more valuable, not less. Leaders still have to determine what matters, what stops, where risk belongs, what AI should or should not do, and what still requires human intervention. That is why this is not fundamentally a technology conversation today, it's a leadership conversation. So what's the golden thread? What connects all of this together? Well, it's the work itself, how work enters the organization, how priorities become execution, how decisions are made, how systems connect, how managers lead, and how AI is introduced, and ultimately, how effort becomes value. So as you listen today, I'd encourage you to ask, where does strategy lose its clarity? Where do decisions slow down? Where does work exist because of history rather than of value? And these are not operational questions sitting somewhere beneath you as the CEO. They go directly into your growth, your margin, your culture, your investment, and your organizational capacity. And the breadth of that is exactly what we wanted to create today, and different perspectives from around the room. So when we began shaping what today would look like, I initially assumed that much of this experience would need to come from outside of the Institute. But what became very clear was that an extraordinary amount of it was already in our own peer community. So many of the people you will hear from today are not simply speakers or partners, they're also your peers, they're your fellow members. And that says something very powerful about the caliber of our community. So for me, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our research and presenting partner, Monday.com. A huge thank you to you for helping ground this conversation in the connection between strategy, priorities, workflows, and execution. Dean Swan, Monday.com Senior Vice President across Asia-Pac and Japan, is with us today, and also a very proud CEO Institute member here in the Sydney community. So Dean, thank you for being with us today. To OpenAI, thank you in advance for bringing in an important perspective on what AI now makes possible and what is responsible adoption actually requires. To Kevin Park, their Partnerships Director across APAC, is with us, and Kevin we greatly appreciate what you're going to share with us later on today. And to Time and Attention, thank you for helping turn the AI conversation into something practical for our leaders. Co-founders Jason Ross and Tim O'Neill are both with us today, and Jason is also a member of our Sydney community. And then also to our supporting partners, Enterprise Works and Cuppa. Enterprise Works CEO and founder, Darren Moglia, has become one of the anchors behind the research and evidence that we're going to share with you this morning, and you'll be hearing a lot from Darren this morning. And to Luke Cook, CEO and founder of Cuppa. He's helped us create an environment in which these conversations can actually happen. So Cookie, as he's known to most of us, is also a member of our Sydney membership, and he'll also be today's MC. So please put your hands together and join me in thanking all of our partners. I'd also like to thank the entire team. These events do not put themselves on, as I know you can appreciate. So a huge thank you goes out to Tanya and her entire member experience team who put this on. And I think a round of applause for those guys as well. There will not be one productivity answer today that applies equally to every organization in this room. You all lead different businesses, different sizes, different stages, and all with different constraints. But I would ask you to hold one question throughout the day. We're not on a date. Where have we normalized complexity? Where have delays, where has duplication, reporting, workarounds, approvals, or competing priorities simply become part of the way things work? And perhaps add a second question. If we removed that work, where would we deliberately reinvest in that capacity? Because releasing capacity without deciding where it goes, that's not transformation. That's merely creating more room for more activity. So the good news is it's solvable. We can solve this today. We can redesign work, we can make faster and better decisions, we can connect systems more intelligently, and we can use AI to remove low-value activity, and we can strengthen our managers. And we can create organizations in which strategy and execution are far more tightly connected. So today, I would encourage each and every one of you to identify things in your organization that you can stop, that you can simplify, or that you can maybe redesign. And remember my earlier question, if something starts, what stops? Because the next productivity frontier is not how much more we can get out of our people, it's how much wasted work we can take out of their way. Enjoy the day. Thank you from me. It now obviously gives me my last piece of duties today is to introduce our MC for the day. So I mentioned him a little bit earlier, Luke Cook, CEO and founder of Cuppa, or Cookie as I mentioned. He knows how to draw out the strongest ideas in a room. I've seen him MC for us up in Brisbane last week, and I know he'll hold the room really well for us all. So please put your hands together one last time and introduce Cookie to the stage.
Thanks, buddy. Keep that round of applause going because there's 92% of members here in Sydney showing up today, which has been one of the biggest attendance ever. So round of applause to everyone. So I am your MC today, and my role is to keep us on time. My role is to tell you to turn your mobile phones off or on silent, please. My role is also to point out the exits if there is any emergency and the toilets are just outside, but I am going to keep us on track. But I'm also here to provoke more conversations that you'll have on your tables. The table conversations today are going to be critical for us to be able to move this session into the right zones where all of us can turn our moments into positive movements of change. You see, I launched Cuppa 6 years ago, in a place where my mental health wasn't in a good spot. I started holding spaces of conversations around important topic areas, and over the course of the last 6 years, I've helped over 400 organisations tackle the biggest moments that they're having in their businesses. There is no bigger topic area right now than this one that we're having today, and Richard has set that up perfectly. I want you to think of 3 words: time well spent. Today, I want our time together to be well spent. I want you to be thinking about this inside your organisations as well. How do we help our employees? How do we help ourselves with our own time well spent? We launched this national conversation on July 10th, and we're going to hear from Darren Moglier in a second. I've got to talk to you about this, Darren, in a second. Where we started this national conversation. Did anyone see the live stream on July 10th? A few people? It really started something for us. It started something where it was always done on a collective effort. You see, to be able to turn a moment into a positive movement of change, we need to find meaning from every moment, to manifest a new reality, to map a new reality, to create momentum, and to build that movement. Movements only exist if it's a collective effort. The reason why I love standing in this room and being part of Syndicate number 45 as well is that we have a whole bunch of bright minds here who are tackling this issue. The more we talk about it with what we're doing inside our organisations, how we're approaching it, and sharing what we're doing, the more we can build this collective momentum. So yes, you're going to hear from a lot of people today. Yes, you're going to understand some insights and data. Yes, you're going to be able to brainstorm new ways of approaching things for your organisation, but keep the conversation going. Don't let this moment stop. Let's galvanise together and create something really special from today's session. Which leads me into our first guest today. Now, I've been pronouncing his name Darren Moglia. I've known this guy for about 8 months. It's Mollia. It's got a little pronunciation on here, Darren. I never knew that. Darren and I have been tackling this issue, and funnily enough, Darren, thank you for not letting me know that I've been saying your name wrong for this 8-month period. That we're actually on the same board together of a mental health charity called Heart on My Sleeve, and he hasn't even opened up about the name. That's hurting me today, Daz. So Darren Mollia is the founder and managing director of Enterprise Works, a research and advisory firm focused on the future of productivity in Australia and New Zealand organisations. He brings over 20 plus years in the financial services leadership, including senior roles at Westpac, BT Financial Group and Macquarie, to his work helping businesses navigate shifting demands of modern workplaces. Darren leads Enterprise Works flagship research, drawing on 400 plus ANZ knowledge workers and senior leaders alongside 125 plus sources to uncover where productivity is being lost inside large organisations and how it can be reclaimed. In his session today, he's going to share the report's key findings on the stalling productivity growth, rising workforce stress and rise of AI, making the case that sustainable growth comes not from doing more with less, but from designing better ways of working. Darren, can you come to the stage? Everyone give Darren a round of applause. About time I get your name right, mate.
Moglia is fine. Thank you, Cookie. Thank you, Richard. Thank you all for having me here. I'll take you back to where this started. So I met Richard at an event in February for the first time, and we just got into this deep, we almost missed a boat actually. I think if Paul Bloxham was there, we definitely would have missed the boat, because we had this deep discussion about productivity. Like and I've never met anyone as passionate about it, and since then I've come to know that Richard is really a thought leader across Australia in how we take the country forward. But why we talk about productivity is not productivity itself, it's a belief in leaders and people. And as much as we sort of often think about it as a macroeconomic issue and a government issue, anything the government does might help around the edges. Yes, streamlining red tape will help, but the truth is that growth has always come from, and future growth will come from, leaders and people. And so since then, I've had a chance to get to know a lot of the members of the CEO Institute, and hopefully a lot more today. And I've just been absolutely inspired by the potential we have among our leaders. And so today is really to help bring some truths, bring some data, and I hope everyone can kind of come out of here with a clear way forward and hopefully make the complex a bit simpler. So first of all, why does productivity matter? We often think about it as charts. It often gets a lot of headlines in the media. It is the single biggest long-run predictor of living standards. And when productivity growth is going down, it shows up in cost pressure, workforce fatigue and burnout. Investments are not generating as much return. It then leads to things like cost cutting, restructures. And so that's why it matters, particularly for future generations, for our children. Our ability to invest in this country, our ability to remain globally competitive. Productivity growth is the single biggest lever. So as I get into the research, I also want to thank Dean Swan and the team who are here from Monday. My background is I actually started getting obsessed with this whole idea of how organisations connect back in 2015. I was part of an executive team at Westpac who did a global tour of 22 high-performing organisations. And they all did it differently, but the way they connected work in their organisation was the common DNA. As Cookie said, I spent 25 years at Westpac and Macquarie, and so I've seen it from the inside of large, complex organisations. The role I had at Westpac over the last 4 years was coordinating planning across about 2,000 people, 150 leaders, big cross-functional single group plan. And so I've seen all that complexity, and through that process, I recognised that work was breaking down inside organisations, even though we had amazing leaders with the best intent and amazing people who want to be part of a strategy and part of a mission. So that led me to leave Westpac in August last year. I've spent 9 months doing deep research, 150 research studies, had about 200 conversations with people in the market, and we also surveyed over 400 leaders across Australia and New Zealand. So We're going to share kind of the top line insights from all of that today. And part of that journey is I met Dean and Monday, and I'd got to know them actually because we were a Monday user at Westpac. But the conversation I had with them late last year and all the conversations I'm now having with technology leaders is this idea of the collective. How do we all come together? And so the first conversation I had with Dean was actually around productivity and burnout, and how do we help organisations actually unlock more of their capacity, connect up more of the work. And from there, they have sponsored this independent research. So huge thank you to Monday. Okay, so why it matters now. And we're so lucky to have Paul joining us shortly, who's going to talk about all the things that feed into productivity. But there's 3 risks and also opportunities for the future that we are really concerned about. And one of the first key messages is there is, I call it hope with urgency. There is lots of reason to be hopeful for the future, but there is a need for action right now. And so the first chart is Australia's long-term productivity growth is more than halved over the last decade. And all the data we look at says it's in structural decline. So we need a circuit breaker to turn that around. The second is rising workplace stress, and these are the latest Gallup numbers. We've got Claire here, who's the head of APAC for Gallup, and is going to unpack that a bit more later. But those 2 things alone, declining productivity growth, rising stress, in fact, it's at its all-time high, when we're heading into one of the biggest changes to work and our workforces that we've ever seen with AI, is the convergence of 3 things. So we need to absolutely reset productivity. We need to do it in a way that doesn't put more pressure on our people. And today we're going to talk about some of the foundations to make sure we're leading with AI. AI is going to happen. In fact, one of the conversations I'm concerned about at the moment is this sort of feeling that we just got to let AI unfold, or that we can't predict the future with AI. There's a lot we do know. We know how the technology works. We know what the biggest use cases are where it's adding value. We know what the biggest barriers are to getting value out of AI. We also know what government regulation is likely to look like and the adoption curve. So there is a real call to action to go after it now. So key findings. Over the last decade, if you kind of go, why has workforce productivity growth more than halved? And this is a lot of the work we did over the last 9 months, is it's crept in. Complexity and fragmentation, and now a lot of manual coordination to hold it all together has crept in. And so the work environment has become more complex. If you think about 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the external, we've got ESG now, we've got cyber risk, we've got privacy policies, there's a lot of regulation. All that needs to be managed. So straight away, it's already a more complex environment. Then SaaS tool, so pay by the month licenses technology has crept in. And so the current data point there is the average organisation has 305 systems with only 15% centrally managed. And I do think there's an effect here where we've kind of lost some control of our organisations, and it's time to take that back. So all that complexity has crept in. Obviously data, we have a lot more data in a lot more places. And all those tools have come with notifications. And if you think about the people and what's going on their phone or their desktop, there's chat, there's notifications. In fact, the latest numbers are about 275 distractions on average per day. So then when all of that gets more fragmented and complex, we book a meeting. And I'll show you on the next slide what the data looks like at the moment. And I'm kind of increasingly calling this work debt. There is this load on our businesses that we need to free up in exactly the same way as we need to kind of pay off the debt by making it simpler. So the first thing is that I think collectively we've done a really good job at communicating strategy. 83% of people understand their company's strategy. But that breaks down when the strategy moves into delivery. And so just over half say they actually understand how their daily work connects to the strategy. Secondly, the amount of time being spent on manual workarounds between systems and also manual reporting. So 42% of people saying they spend significant time each week on manual reporting. That goes to 62% for senior leaders. So PowerPoint presentations, ad hoc requests, preparing status reports, there's a huge manual reporting and manual task load on our teams. And the third thing is just the amount of time in meetings, meeting culture. And really what has happened here is meetings have replaced focused work. So we used to have desk time, we used to have more clarity on the priorities that matter. When you're spending 45% of the work week in meetings, there's no time to execute the work. So going to talk through then the practical actions out of all of that. And it really, the big word that is emerging very early stage at the moment is work design. So the two things that I think are kind of the most important concepts out of all the research are, first of all, AI is coming, clearly. I think we had the Brisbane event 2 weeks ago, and I think it was about every 5 minutes I was sort of mentally polling, there was a reference to AI. But it very quickly came back to the foundations of how we're connecting up our systems, data, and our people. So AI is going to be in every conversation, but AI only will be another tool and another layer of complexity on top of foundations that are not ready. And so the big discussion that is starting to emerge in organisations like Medibank are talking about it, I'm seeing more kind of dedicated roles pop up in organisations, is around work design, right? Which is fundamentally the operating system and how we connect our organisation. And it comes down to these three things. And I've given everybody, there is a flyer on the page with key research insights, but also the actions I'm about to run through. So don't worry if you don't capture it here. And we're also going to be sending out an executive insights version of the research. But as we talk through it, the one thing that I'd really recommend taking out of all this is to start to focus on work design and talk about work design to your teams. How do we connect up the organisation, unlock capacity, allocate more of our precious resources to the work that matters most? So there's kind of three big shifts. The first is aligning strategy with execution, and Dean Swan's going to share his insights shortly around how we practically do this. You can see through the statistics there that with only around half people understanding how strategy connects to their day-to-day work, huge amount of rework. And one of the things I do talk really honestly about is restructuring and constant change absolutely kills momentum in organisations. So one of the unfortunate side effects of the productivity pressure we all feel is there's a lot of cost cutting and restructuring going on, particularly in large organisations, but that is eroding the margin of our economy and of our businesses. And you can see there 49% saying changing requirements or rework creates wasted effort. So there's a big difference between having a stable operating model and flowing work through and having some agility when things change versus constantly restructuring all the effort that goes around that. And then Dean will touch on as well, is really important to align capacity. There's often not a clear view of what people are working on, how precious capacity is aligned to the work. So the 5 key things we talk about, even just at the simplest level, is keep the operating model stable. It is probably the number one thing that distracts and disrupts organisations. Create clarity, reduce distractions. So I often talk to leaders about the top 3. If every team, if every person is focused on their clear top 3, that is a huge win. And empower people to turn off all the notifications and turn off the distractions. Third thing is choose fewer priorities, go deeper. So it's really, really clear that increasingly it's not just about clever strategy, it's about strategies about knowing that to move an organisation, whether it's 3, 5, 10 people or 30,000 people, it's difficult. A leader has to really communicate, make sure they feel connected to the mission and strategy, and then make sure they're really clear on what those priorities are. So putting all that effort and sustaining it over time into fewer things and seeing them through completion has a very high correlation with growth and performance. Fourth thing, and this is one of the things we did at Westpac with Monday.com, is one front door aligned to capacity. So as Richard said, work starts, I mapped this at Westpac, and it was like a meeting, a chat notification, a conversation. Work would start and capacity would get absorbed in all these different places. And so we basically created a meeting place for new ideas, new work, and they would be aligned to the strategy, they would be prioritised, and we do a capacity check. And that created a discipline where we really thought through the work we were putting forward and the priority decisions we were making. And then push decisions close to the work. The best analogy here is a relay race. Every decision that has to go up, every decision that has to wait, is a handoff, is a risk of it slowing down and also losing interpretation. And they add up across an organisation. So creating clear accountability decision rights and the guardrails around them and trying to locate as close to the work as possible. So that's trying to connect more of that 32-point gap of people's day-to-day work with strategy. The second big shift is then connecting systems, data and AI. And we've got Warren and an amazing panel later on that are going to be talking about this. And the thing here is really to make the complex simple. And so when we think about AI, and also when we think about setting up our organisation to have maximum efficiency, maximum output, and also agility for the future, I met Paul Bloxham in May, and we were talking about productivity, and he said something that's really stuck in my mind, which is a lot of organisations are optimising for the 12 months, the immediate. The art is to optimise for the immediate and the 3-year view, right? So what are the set of things that will help us now and help us grow? And I think the other thing there is we need to optimise for agility. We know a lot's going to change, and we want to be agile. So these foundations are absolutely core for that. And so a single data layer, trusted data layer, that connects in all of our data. The good news is the technology makes that more possible than ever. We can now look at structured and unstructured data. But I often say the two biggest competitive advantages for the future, based on all of our research and modelling, are going to be people, number one, because they're all about to be equipped with AI tools that will amplify their intelligence and their innovation and capability for get it right. And the second thing is data. If you think about it, and we were having this conversation earlier, the world is investing in these AI tools, which are just the ability to access data in real time and do a whole lot of things. That will only work on top of the data that it can reason and read. And so trusted data layer with the right governance flowing into systems is absolute foundation for the future. Then it's one core system for each need. And so I think with probably a lot of good intent, we've not wanted to say no, or we just don't have the controls in place. It's become too easy to download all these different systems. The challenge is the cost stacks up. So part of our research is what we've seen is leaders feeling like they're doing the right thing investing in technology. In fact, it's been growing at about 8% over the last 5 years, 8% per annum. And so now they're having, because they're under cost pressure, they're letting their people go. We look at that and go, you've got 305 systems, only 15% are centrally managed. Your people are about to be equipped with AI. It's the reverse. Rationalise the technology cost base. In fact, I'm increasingly talking about consolidate, save, and reinvest, particularly in the data layer and enabling AI tools. Don't reduce your people. They're all about to get equipped, thanks to the global investment that's happening. And then embed AI into core workflows. So absolutely Gen AI tools, like we've got Kevin here for OpenAI, and a lot of people are using Copilot or ChatGPT for business. In the future, we see, in fact, BCG estimated at 70%, most of the upside will actually be in AI that is embedded in the work. And you think about that, right? Rather than have a tool over here and our work over here, it's actually being integrated into the core work, and it will increasingly do the 20, 30, sometimes 40% of manual work, which will then free up capacity to focus on higher value activity. And the last one is probably the more complex, and we're going to talk a little bit about agentic on the panel, but agentic, which is chained AI that can actually increasingly automate an end-to-end process. The truth of that is that you really want to go after a small number of very high volume manual processes. Those that are winning globally are doing that, right? Because you've still got to map the process, there's still a lot of work that goes into it, so you really want to pick those big, heavy processes that no one wants to do. The rest of it is going to be actually embedding AIs into core work and equipping our people to use them and have that data flowing through. And the last and most important, as I said, is people. And so we've got Claire, who will share some amazing data. I think Gallup have the best data globally, in my view, around engagement and wellbeing. The key takeout there, and I can take you through the numbers in more detail, is the number one leading indicator of performance is engagement and wellbeing. So I'm really encouraging leaders not to think about it as a soft metric over here and financial metrics over here. We know it's important. We all understand there's a link. What I'm saying is the direct correlation between engagement and wellbeing and long-term performance is really clear. To the point where, as a leader, if you can give your people clarity, give them the space to deliver, and really double down on engagement and wellbeing, you will outperform as a company. Second point is leaders, and Claire will touch on this too. Leaders are under more pressure than ever. They're kind of the layer that gets squeezed. Their world's gotten a lot more complex. Their statistics like 62% of time spent on manual reporting. I spoke about that 49% wasted effort from rework. That's about 57% for senior leaders. So they bear the brunt of everything. They're that sort of layer between the team who really need their leadership and their direction and us as leaders. And then on AI, we're going to talk a lot about that through the second half of the session today. And so building practical skills in daily work, one thing I advocate for when we talk about AI training, and I'm very much human-centered AI, we talk about safety, risk awareness, ethics first. We then talk about don't give away your cognitive capacity, which is something we're increasingly concerned about, particularly with a productivity issue, because when people get tired and overloaded, they just ask AI to do more. AI is amazing as a learning resource to automate low-value tasks, to do research, QA, all of those things, but we need our people to be the innovators of the future. We need them to be using AI to amplify their intelligence. So not giving away that cognitive work. And the third thing is actually focusing on the use cases that really unlock value. And often that is automating reporting or tasks that are just taking up a lot of the day. And the easiest way to spot those is the tasks they don't want to do. And the last thing, which I know we'll get into in the panel later, is actually AI. All the data is really clear that AI can unlock a lot of capacity. The big question for leaders is going to be where do we reinvest that for the future? So I'm going to leave it there. This probably feels like a lot, but the big message is we are in control of the future. And absolutely Australia's growth and a better future for our workforce, for our children, will come from the decisions we make as leaders. The analogy I want to leave you with, and aeroplane and pilot analogies are a little bit cliche now, but I really do think the earliest metaphor for what we're going through now is probably the plane pilot. They used to, have all the dials and run the plane and everything. You think about what they do now. They turn up, they oversee, they're there to step in when things go wrong. They are absolutely looking at the 360 vision, and if you think about it, they're there to reassure you when you get on the plane and to thank you at the end of the trip. So increasingly, we will see connected organisations more automated, and our role is going to be to make sure those foundations are right, make sure our people have clarity, and to be there to kind of oversee and steer them through it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, brother. Well done, Daz. Thank you, Darren, for that. A lot of information there, and hopefully that has triggered some thoughts in how you might be able to think about this inside your organisation. Well, let's keep this moving. We're now coming up to the next part, which is Australia's economic outlook, current conditions and productivity imperative. I know this man. He's been around for a while. He's pretty much at every event, aren't you, Paul? Paul Bloxham is HSBC's Chief Economist for Australia, New Zealand and Global Commodities, and the bank's Chief Spokesperson on economic trends and forecasts across the region. He spent 12 years at the Reserve Bank of Australia before joining HSBC in 2010, and his team has reportedly been ranked among the country's top forecasters, including recognition by the AFR as Australia's top economic forecaster. In his update today, Paul unpacks what we need to drive productivity in Australia's economy, cutting through the noise to give a clear, data-backed read on where growth, investment and the labour markets are heading and what it means for business decision-making. He's also one of the best speakers that is here. So, Paul, come up. Everyone give Paul a big round of applause. Thank you. Do you need that?
Well, thank you very much for setting the bar nice and high. It's great to be here, and I really appreciate being invited to give you an overview of how the economy's travelling, in particular what's going on with productivity. When Richard and Darren sat on a call with me about 3 or 4 months ago, I thought this was when they spoke about this idea of having an event that was focused on productivity. I jumped at the chance of speaking, but also thought it is a wonderful thing that you're all really focused on this particular issue. Because if you come along, and the CEO Institute has kindly invited me to give the overview at the beginning of the year now for about a decade or more, if you come along to those events, of course, I have been very, very focused over the last few years, probably the last 4 or 5, on productivity and our productivity challenge being Australia's biggest economic problem. And I think we're now seeing that has become a lot more, it's become a lot more prominent, and it's become a lot more the focus in the market as well. That it's as though the chickens are coming home to roost, as it were, sort of the actions we haven't taken previously to deal with challenges that are deeper around the productivity story are starting to become much more prominent. And it's interesting to be up here on this particular day. So this afternoon, the Reserve Bank of Australia, as you probably know, is meeting, and they're going to decide whether they'll leave their cash rate steady or lift it again. There's really no conversation about interest rate cuts. And I think it's even the productivity story even seeps pretty strongly into that right now. The primary reason why the RBA is needing to lift interest, or has lifted interest rates 3 times already, and is needing to keep a tight policy setting at the moment, is because the economy just can't grow very fast. It's not that the economy is particularly strong. I mean, no one would think that we're running particularly strongly at the moment. It's that we are running above our speed limit. We're running faster than the economy can sustain. But it turns out that we're not running particularly quickly. Growth is not particularly strong. It's just that speed limit is really, really low. And it's lower than it's been for a number of years. It's lower than it's been in recent history. And so that hitting the speed limit last year pushed inflation up, surprised the RBA to the upside on inflation. They had to lift interest rates early this year, which they obviously didn't really think they'd be doing. We're the only central bank in the G10 that's lifted interest rates multiple times this year. So it's not really a Middle East story. It's not about the conflict in the Middle East and the rise in cost pressures that are going to come from that, and that may very well add to things, but that's not the reason the RBA has lifted interest rates. It's because we hit what is a very low speed limit. It started to lift inflation earlier than was expected, and the RBA is now forced into this really quite uncomfortable spot where they are pushing the economy into a downturn, into a downswing, sort of weakening growth in the economy, weakening growth in demand, to get it to grow more slowly than its current very low speed limit. And of course, the thing that we could do best to try to solve this problem is not use monetary policy and interest rates and what the RBA does, but what we could do more clearly is focus wholly on trying to make that speed limit faster, lift the pace at which the economy can grow. The speed limit for the Australian economy, at least on our estimates at the moment, is probably a little bit below 2%. And that's the lowest it's been in decades, perhaps ever. We used to talk about the speed limit for the Australian economy a while ago being something closer to 3%. That was the sort of standard. And if you go back far enough into the early part of this century, we were talking about 3.5. It looks as though now the potential growth rate for the economy is 2% at best, maybe a little bit lower than that. And that's the sort of framing, at least, the first initial framing I wanted to give to why this is so important, why it is so front and center, and why it is right now. Like, it's not tomorrow, it's a problem we have right now that, you know, we have to slow the economy down because the economy can't sustain as much growth as it used to, and our speed limit is lower than it's been, probably sub 2%, because of productivity. Okay, so at this point, it's most useful, I think, for an economist to try to explain what I am talking about when I talk about productivity. What am I talking about? Like, how am I measuring it? We all have different sort of conceptions of what productivity is. When you run a business, it's all about how you operate. When you're a policymaker, you're looking at productivity in a different way. I can tell you one thing, I don't think the general public really has much conception at all about the word productivity. They usually hear it and think, oh, that means I'm going to have to work harder. And the answer is actually no. If you work harder, that reduces productivity if it doesn't produce more output, right? We're talking about working smarter, being more efficient. So, how does an economist get to a picture of productivity? And Darren very kindly put up a chart that showed an average of productivity. The only thing I would do slightly differently is it's a 20-year average. You're averaging for 20 years. Actually, in the last 10 years, it's really gotten a whole lot worse, right? And we'll get to that in just a moment. So what are we talking about in terms of a measure of productivity that economists that point to regularly? Well, we mostly talk about something called labour productivity. And that's because it's really quite simple. And simple is good for communicating to people as to what the challenge is. And when we're measuring labour productivity, we're doing it in a really quite straightforward way. It's very similar. It's the chart, I think, that Darren put up in a 20-year average, right? It's very simple. GDP, we're counting up how much output there is in the economy, how much is produced in the economy. You hear this number cited and bandied around all the time. It's currently Last year it grew by 2.6%. As I'm saying, it can't grow much faster than 2 without inflating the economy, GDP. And we divide GDP by the number of hours that are worked in the economy. And that is what we come up with in terms of a measure of GDP per hour worked, or output per hour worked. Now, if you want to go a little bit deeper, because we're here to go a little bit deeper, it's actually not quite as simple as all of that, because GDP is a measure of output, but there are all sorts of things that are missing from it, and there are all sorts of measurement challenges. And it may seem surprising, but it's surprisingly hard to get an accurate measure of hours worked as well. How many hours did you work this week? I have no idea how many hours I work. I work sort of randomly here and there on the weekend if I need to. Sometimes it's in the evening, sometimes it's not. Averaging, we just did the census. I did it last night. I don't know about you guys, you're probably doing it today. Like, it asks you how many hours you work, and you have like, how many hours do I work? So it's actually not that easy to get to really precise metrics of these things. But we've got to do something. We're macroeconomists. So we divide GDP by hours worked. We come up with a measure as best we can, and we track that through time. So when we look at this measure of output per hour worked, it is actually quite worrisome. So if you look at what's been going on over the past few years, it bounces around because it's quite volatile and, as I say, hard to measure. But if you took a 10-year average and you looked at where we are right now, over the past 10 years, GDP per hour worked, output per hour worked in Australia has grown by 0.3% a year. That's how fast it's been growing, right? Very conveniently, actually, the last quarterly print we got for the March quarter, the year-on-year rate, the most recent data, shows 0.3 as well. So we are currently running at 0.3% on this metric. It is the average over the past decade that it's been running at 0.3%. And that is very weak. I mean, that is close to zero, right? There's very little in that. It's actually, if you round it down, you look at the rounding, it's slightly below 0.3 actually. It's quite, a weak performance for productivity. If you look and compare it to the rest of the world, we have had one of the worst productivity performances in the post-pandemic period across the developed world. So if you compared us to lots of other developed countries, you'd find a whole scattering of countries, and you'd find that we are really at the bottom of that listing. Most of the European countries are just a bit above us. The US economy is miles above us, and we'll get to that in just a moment because that's important as well, right? The US has had an average growth rate of productivity over the past decade of 2% a year. So we're doing 0.3% a year for the past decade. They're doing 2% a year over the past decade. If you take that whole decade together, it means there's a 20 percentage point gap between us and the technological leader, as it were, the US, right? If, by the way, just as a little back of the envelope, we managed to have kept up with the US, which would be hard, but nonetheless, we even got anywhere near it, that's about $450 billion worth of extra GDP that the economy is missing out on every year because our productivity performance is so much weaker. So we are bottom of the pile. The US is the leader. We'll come to why and what we can do about it and so on, and that's a lot of the sessions today, obviously. But that's where we stand over the past decade. How does it compare to our own history? Well, it's pretty poor compared to our own history. It's part of the reason the speed limits come down. 0.3% over the past decade on average. If you go back to 2005 through 2015, it was averaging 1.3, all right? It was averaging 1.3 per year. It turns out back then, we were seemingly able to lift our productivity every year by 1.3%. When we put a certain number of hours in, a year later, we would get 1.3% more output. Now we're putting a certain number of hours in, and a year later only getting 0.3. This is a fundamental challenge because if this is lower than it used to be, then we are not lifting our output per hour worked. We're not lifting our living standards. This is what we talk about when we talk about growing living standards, having more income in the economy to share around on a per capita basis. One of the bits of feedback I get quite often when I talk about this, because as you can appreciate, I've talked about this, and I do all the time and have done for years now. One of the things you get in a casual sidebar conversation is, do we really need to worry about this? Australia is already a wealthy place. GDP per hour worked is already very high. We are. It's true. Absolutely. Actually, our level of productivity is quite high relative to a lot of other countries, relative to the developed world, and so on. And I guess my answers are sort of manifold. My first one is, aren't we lucky that we start off in a good place? That's kind of, we are a wealthy country, and that's a very helpful feature. The second answer is, well, we really should be taking advantage of the opportunities we've got. If we can grow faster, surely we should be trying to take advantage of those opportunities. And I guess the third one that really, I think, makes it very, very stark is, if you can't grow the economy and you can't lift living standards over time, we have not really worked out yet how to successfully redistribute and sort of allow younger people to move through and still do well, and for there to be people moving between parts of the income distribution, for there to be opportunities to aspire and move through. We grow the economy, that creates opportunities, people compete, businesses compete, and that's how we distribute within the economy. We haven't worked out really how to do this when the economy's stagnant. And the challenge then becomes, it starts to interact with the political system as well. And that's where I think we are probably starting to move in Australia right now as well. Living standards haven't been lifting for a number of years. Productivity growth has been weak in a sustained sense. When you survey the public, they say they're very unhappy about the outlook for the economy. They're worried about the cost of living. They're worried about the cost of housing. There are lots of concerns in the economy, and then that starts to get manifest in a fragmenting political system. And so that's the next possible risk that can come along from all of this. So that's sort of the summary, a brief summary of what we look at when we measure productivity, how important it can be, and sort of the really, really big picture stuff. If I link it back to the first part of my narrative, the speed limit story, I mean, again, it's some simple arithmetic you can keep in your head. When we come up with how fast the Australian economy or an economy can grow, what the potential growth rate for an economy is, or, as I prefer to use because I think it's a nice little way of thinking about things, the speed limit for the economy, in effect what we're doing is adding together productivity and how many people we've got working, the working age. That's it. If you break up GDP, there's lots of ways to do it, but this is one way: productivity plus working age population. How many people are working in your economy? So in principle, it's actually productivity plus population. That's kind of how we get there. Population growth is running at about 1.5%. Productivity growth is running at 0.3 on average over the past decade. And so we're saying, I'm claiming, that our sustainable growth rate, our speed limit at the moment, is probably about 1.8. It used to run productivity at 1.3 in the decade between 2005 and 2015. So back then, if we were growing population at 1.5, our sustainable growth rate was probably 2.8. And that's very close to what we're talking about, 2 and 3. We're down from 3 down to 2. And this is how, again, I'm trying to explain to you how an economist really thinks about how we fit together and what's going on in terms of the economy. The other challenge I get is people coming back and saying, hold on a moment, you don't really know how to measure hours work that well. You've even admitted it. And you don't, GDP is kind of one measure of output and so on. So, like, is that the only, are you really, really convinced that productivity slowed down as much as you're describing? And I say, well, this is one way we look at the economy and this is how we measure it, but we can look at the outcomes to try to determine whether that's right or not. And one of the outcomes that we most vividly watch at the moment in terms of managing the economy is inflation, is domestic inflation. If it turns out that the economy is growing faster than its speed limit, so demand is picking up in the economy ahead of the capacity of the economy to supply. Keep in mind, productivity is the combination of how much we can produce, and that's giving us our speed limit. That's the supply side of our economy. That's what we're estimating. If demand is accelerating ahead of supply, then inflation's going to pick up. We're going to see it in prices. We're going to say we can't actually meet all that demand, so prices are going to start to drive themselves higher. And that's exactly why the RBA, or one of the primary reasons why the RBA has an inflation target. Its job is to try to manage cycles in demand and keep the economy growing in line with its capacity to supply. That's really its job. If it turns out that demand is picking up faster than the economy can sustain, then the RBA has to try to slow the economy down. And that's exactly what they've been doing. They've been lifting interest rates to slow down demand, to get the economy to grow more slowly, to keep inflation contained. If it turns out, prior to the pandemic, for example, we'd been in a long period with very low inflation, demand had been weaker than supply. We'd seen it wasn't productivity, it was just that demand was pretty sluggish. It was pretty soggy. Well, the RBA could choose to lower interest rates and stimulate demand and get it to pick up. So when we sort of come to a conclusion, or come to a view at least, that the speed limit is lower than it was and that productivity growth is weak and that that's a sustained challenge that we've got, we sort of look across a whole range of different metrics to get there. Okay, I mentioned something about the US. I said the US has had a much better productivity performance than we have had. Well, one of the stories is simply that the US is the technological leader, right? They're generally ahead on most technologies, and so they tend to be the leader. But it's not the only story, because in the past, the way we've managed to improve our productivity, even though we don't necessarily invent the technologies, is being very, very fast at adopting them and efficiently using them in our businesses in a way, and our government, in a way that actually allows us to grow our productivity in a way that sort of not quite keeps up, but almost keeps up with the US. So that's not a big enough excuse. Why has the US had such a positive productivity performance over the past little while? Why are they the leader in terms of productivity growth? Why have we got 10% over the past 10 years, 2% growth on average relative to the rest of the world? Now, the first answer may very well be, in your head you might go, well, that's AI, isn't it? That's technology coming along and so on. And my answer, and most of the economists would say, probably not yet, because it's too early. Like, I'm talking about productivity growth over the past 10 years, and that it's been quite sustained in the US over the past 10 years in a positive way. It can't possibly, I mean, AI is just too new a phenomenon. It hasn't been adopted more widely enough yet to be the key story. So I tend to point to other things. I think, one, the US has been very good at getting cheap energy from the shale revolution and using that cheap energy to support its competitiveness. One of the key fundamental inputs into supporting productivity growth is that you've got the inputs into being able to produce things, and you attract investment because you've got those inputs. And so the US did a marvelous job of having the shale revolution, putting a lot of gas into the system and keeping it at low prices over a long extended period, and therefore supporting growth. That's a long, medium-term story, because the shale revolution started in about 2008, 2009. That's when it came in, and so that's one of the features. Two, I think the other really, really big thing is the US economy is very dynamic. And so when shocks come along, it shifts quite quickly. It's quite competitive in the scheme of things. And in a related way, I guess the third one for me is, and this is why I think in the post-pandemic period you've seen their performance has been stronger than others, and if you've been to my presentations before, you'll have heard me talk about this, because I've written about this quite a bit. I think the pandemic policy response had a big effect on the US as well. Right? The design of the pandemic policy response relative to the rest of the world. So what did we do? In the face of the pandemic, we did what all the European countries and the UK did, and New Zealand did as well. We basically put out a scheme that kept everyone in the same spot. We protected everyone, which is, by the way, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't have. I'm saying there's a consequence of that, right? We kept all the firms alive by having moratoria on corporate insolvencies. We had the tax department giving holidays. We had the JobKeeper scheme keeping everyone in the same job. And wage subsidy schemes were broadly used across the European countries as well. Now, the Americans gave really, really big sort of support to households and businesses through the pandemic, but they didn't tie everyone in the same spot. They didn't have a wage subsidy scheme that kept everyone in the same job. They didn't provide as much support for businesses and so on. So the pandemic came along, a recession came along, the unemployment rate went up, corporate insolvencies rose, they got a massive amount of churn. A really big shift around in their economy. The stronger firms did well, the weaker ones disappeared. When the economy started to recover, that shock actually drove some cleansing out and a cyclical recovery in productivity that continued to support their economy as well. I'm, by the way, not advocating or arguing that we should have done it differently. I'm saying this is a consequence of what we did, partly, right? Part of the consequence has been weaker productivity. Less dynamism, less diffusion, less change in your economy. So this has left the US as a leader, and it's left us well behind. What have we done in terms of the challenges that we've presented ourselves on productivity? Well, Darren talked about a lot of these in particular. I mean, when we talk about productivity, and particularly when I give presentations, I spend a lot of time, and that's why this is so good, by the way, what you guys are doing is so good. I spend a lot of time talking about what policymakers can do. Ultimately, businesses are the ones that really drive productivity and change. But what we want is policymakers to adjust things so that it encourages businesses to want to innovate and invest and change practices. And so this is what we're looking for from policymakers. So for a number of years now, I've talked about what policymakers ought to be doing, what we ought to be doing to try to encourage businesses to innovate and invest and to lift productivity. And so the list you've probably heard before, but there's a few things on this list. I would put at the top of the list tax reform. And I don't mean what was done in the May budget, because I wouldn't call that tax reform, I'd call that tax adjustments. But I mean tax reform that leads to a more efficient tax system. And again, let's dig down a little bit. When an economist talks about an efficient tax system, what do we mean? Well, what we're trying to do with making the tax system more efficient is encourage the things in the economy that we want to happen, right? What we want is businesses to want to invest and think that Australia is an attractive place to invest. What we want is workers to participate in the workforce and feel like they're getting their fair share of what's going on, that they are willing to and avidly participate in an active way in the workforce. So if you have high income tax rates that rise because the system isn't indexed, it discourages people from working and doing that marginal bit of extra work and participating. If you have corporate tax rates that are high, you discourage businesses from wanting to make that next investment decision and invest in Australia. And it's a competitive race because we, compared to the rest of the world, capital is mobile. It can go to other countries as well. And if you have a look at where we are right now, we have one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. We now have one of the highest capital gains tax rates in the world. We have some of the highest personal income tax rates as well. And if you added all of that together and you collected that as an aggregate, if you ranked all of the 38 OECD economies at the moment and you looked at what the proportion of the tax revenue that the tax systems in those countries get from their personal income and their corporate tax systems, we're second from the top across the 38 OECD economies. So the evidence is clear. We've got a tax system that relies a lot on these tax systems that are actually not very efficient. They discourage the things we want. They discourage participation in the labour market. They discourage investment and innovation by firms. If you did the same ranking, and I'll do this quickly, but if you did the same ranking for the GST, which is actually a much, much more efficient tax because it doesn't discourage the things we want, and it also, and in the way it's designed, it's also our broadest of the national taxes. We're fourth from the bottom in terms of the proportion of the tax revenue we get from the GST. So tax reform, something that made the tax system more efficient, that encouraged businesses to invest, that encouraged workers to participate in the labour market, these are sorts of actions that might help us to lift productivity. Second on my list of three, by the way, of three things we ought to focus on at a policy level would be the regulatory system. One of the things that I get from businesses when I talk to them all day long and every lunch that I do, and I ask them, what are the things that are preventing you from innovating and investing and being more involved? The primary feedback is the regulatory system is very complicated, and of course that then creates all of these, as you described, Darren, all these committees and all this stuff that has to happen to try and make sure you fill in the right. This is the regulatory system is becoming more complex as time goes by, and is burdensome in terms of creating productivity. And of course, included in that, I would include the industrial relations system, which has become all the more complex. And that's certainly feedback I get from businesses on a regular basis, that it's hard to get the workers that you need and hard to get them to do what you want them to do. A third one that I really often mention is competition. We want governments to focus on trying to drive more competition into the economy, because the thing that really motivates businesses to do what they need to do to innovate and invest and change is competition. You don't really do it because you want to, you do it because you have to, you do it because the next guy is doing or the next firm is doing it, and if you don't do it, you'll be out of business, or you don't do it, you'll lose market share. So more competition actually drives more innovation and more change and more efficiency in the economy, which then helps to lift productivity. Now, the problem with everything I've just described is we're not really getting any of that. It's not really happening. And I would say, and I've written and published, I'm very vocal about this, I don't think the May budget is always focused on these sorts of things, and these are the sorts of things it ought to have been focused on. I have been describing productivity as Australia's biggest economic challenge for a number of years. It's now becoming very prominent that it is. The RBA is talking about it a lot more actively than they've done for a long time, because it's making their choices much trickier, much harder to sell. We've got to weaken what is already a weak economy to get inflation down, guys, and sorry about that, but that's just what we've got to do, is kind of the message from the RBA. It's become more clear, but it's not really been the focus of policy, what policymakers have been doing. And so then the question becomes, if it's not happening, and it ought to happen, well, I'd like it to happen, but if I can't make it happen, then what's actually going to happen? What is not the normative, i.e. what I'd really like, what is the actual positive? What is going to happen? What are we facing? Well, I don't think those things are going to shift that much, and certainly not very quickly. So we're facing an economy which has already got inflation that's a bit too high, And so the RBA has already had to lift interest rates to try and slow it down. So we're in an economy that's going into a slowdown. That, I think, is clear. And to be honest, I think if the economy isn't in a big enough slowdown, the RBA may very well have to lift interest rates a bit further to make it go into that slowdown in order to get inflation down, because how else does this work out, right? How else do you get it to happen? And so businesses, you guys, are all going to face an economy which is in a slowdown. I'm not saying it's in a recession, but a downturn, a slowdown. Tougher conditions, harder to sell stuff. Demand's going to be weaker. That's by design. It's what the RBA is doing, right? At the same time, from the bottom, you're getting your cost base that's rising a bit faster because, well, you've got a minimum wage that got lifted by $4.75 this year. You've got the regulatory system that's still complex, the industrial relations system that's still complex, and you've got a global shock as well in the form of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz related to the Middle East conflict, which has pushed up the cost of key inputs like fuel and plastics and fertilisers and a whole range of other things that are gradually feeding through your cost base. So you're getting squeezed at both sides, right? The demand is going to weaken and the cost base is going to rise. And the first step in that is going to be to try and find a way to maintain or gain market share amongst a weakening pool of demand. And then the next step in that is going to be, and I think you're probably almost there, if not already there, we're partway through the earnings season, I think we're seeing firms report this as well, is going to be to start to focus on the cost base. And that cost base story is going to be about finding a way to try to lower the costs that you can, and in the absence of that, find ways to streamline your business model so that it works a bit better and you get through your cost base. And that is the entree into this conversation, because that's what Darren and I talked about, Darren and Richard and I talked about, was that is where I think the economy is at right now. So when you sort of frame that as the set of challenges that you've got, you say to yourself, it's not necessarily that I need to focus on, I mean, I do need to focus right now on the fact that I've got to kind of focus on my cost base to maintain my margins and keep my shareholders or my owners happy. But actually what I also need to keep in mind is a broader and longer term mindset, which is there are changes I can make now because there is this new technological revolution coming along in the form of AI that don't only lower my cost base right now, but actually help me to improve my sustainability in the future, to improve my business model, find that new business idea. But, you know, thinking more broadly about it's not just the sort of next 6 months, 12 months, it's the next 3 years was really what we talked about. And that's kind of how I see where Australia could possibly see some productivity gains coming from, where it could be that the change doesn't necessarily come from policymakers, the change more likely comes from the business community and from the private sector in terms of changes that actually lead to some lift in productivity and help to lift living standards. That's me being hopeful to a degree, right? If you sort of set this against what the Treasury is saying, the Treasury puts together forecasts for productivity. They literally, as a part of their budget process and their long-term budget process, put together a set of forecasts. And I will tell you that the government at the moment is assuming that productivity growth 2 years down the track is back at running at 1.2%. And I keep writing about and saying, how? like hope isn't a strategy. Like just hoping it's going to happen just doesn't work. And the answer reasonably clearly comes back to me whenever I mention it in senior circles. Oh, AI is going to help us a lot. Right? This is going to be a business. So just so you're aware, I think the general story is actually what we're going to see is that it's going to be over to you guys, over to businesses, to be finding a way to lift productivity, to help to support the growth in the economy, to help to support the growth in the tax base as well. Okay, I've got about 1 minute left, but I just want to, in terms of sort of my broader remarks, and then I think I'm going to be taking 10 or 15 minutes worth of questions, but I'm going to use the last little minute to sort of take off some of the things that you're probably going to ask. So, you know, when I talk about productivity slowing down, one of the things that people ask is, well, which industries? Like, is it a particular thing that's going on? And there's a couple of answers to that. If you break down the productivity statistics into industries, what you find is there are some industries where productivity has been very weak and big contributors to that slowdown in productivity growth. And so one of them has been the mining sector. So we had an enormous mining investment boom in the resources sector, the mining resources sector boom in the early part of the century. You remember, we brought on a lot of new capacity, but we haven't been doing much mining investment in recent years. When you bring on new capacity, you generally pull the stuff out of the ground that's easiest and cheapest to get out of the ground. And then after that, you move on to the harder stuff. So that's slowed down productivity in that industry, and that's contributing to the story. Construction has had quite weak productivity. We just haven't found ways to really properly innovate in construction processes. But I think the other overlay, which is probably more important, is the regulatory environment's becoming more and more complex, and the industrial relations system is becoming more and more complex. So when you try to put, for the number of hours you're putting in, it's taking you more hours to actually get the work done because of those various processes, and that's weighing on things. And then the other big one, which is clear and is certainly in the stats, is a bigger share of our economy has become public spending. And in particular, the care economy has gotten a lot larger. So as a proportion of the economy, the public share of the economy has gone from about 22% to about 28% of GDP. So we've had a step up in about 6 percentage points of GDP since prior to the pandemic. And a lot of that relates to more spending on a very rapidly expanding NDIS program, the aged care program, the healthcare programs as well. And part of the story for productivity is productivity in these industries is generally lower on average than in other industries, and so if you put more of that into the economy, you get lower productivity on average. But I'd say the more important feature of this is that there is a lot of misallocation in those programs. It's not necessarily all getting where it should be getting to, and so that's one of the features as well. But, and here's the big but, if you add all of those things together and you took them out of the overall story and you looked at what was left, you'd still find that market sector productivity growth has slowed down a lot. It's running at about 0.5% at the moment, not 0.3, but it's slowed down a lot, and it's running much, much slower than it's done in the past. So to my mind, the stories that I told you about the sorts of things that are actually slowing down aggregate productivity are all quite apparent. What we need to do is, well, what would be ideal is if policymakers made shifts that actually encouraged businesses to make change, invest, and workers to participate more. If they don't do that, in the absence of that, the other mechanism, of course, is businesses coming under enough pressure that they actually need to make change themselves, and that's how you look to innovate, and that's how you look to potentially lift productivity over time. It's not an overly glowingly, wonderfully positive picture that I'm painting for you. I appreciate that. And I guess one of the things I say at the end is always, deep down, I am actually an optimist. I have been optimistic about it. If you've come to these things over the years, and I know a number of you have, 10 years ago, actually, I would have spoken a lot more optimistically. And it was really about the idea that I thought that policymakers would make the sorts of changes that would allow us to transition from what was an extraordinary success we got off the resources boom of the early 2000s, and it boosted and lifted the whole economy, and that if we'd redirected some of that into reform that would actually allow our economy to transition to other industries, there are still wonderful opportunities out there. We're tied to Asia, the fastest growing and most dynamic region on the planet. We've got a highly educated workforce. We've got $4.5 trillion worth of superannuation saving, an independent central bank that operates very well, I think, in the scheme of things, low inflation. We've got a lot of opportunities to sell things to the rest of the world and to grow our economy, but the thing that's standing in the way is a lot of policy settings that I think are really making it difficult to achieve the sort of productivity outcomes that we might hope for. I ran a couple of minutes over, but I'm happy to now. The idea of this, by the way, and we talked about this in the call, was that there would be a bit of interaction, and you can fire questions at me about how this all fits together from a macroeconomic perspective.
Okay,
we have one here.
We're starting to see some hands come up already. We're going to start at the back there. If you can just state your name and what company you're from, that'd be great. Thank you, Paul.
Andrew Morse from PTC, and another great presentation. Thanks, Paul. I was thinking about this question since we heard you the last time, and you sort of made the same statement, that Australia can sort of address its productivity issue through AI, and I agree with that in the local setting, but there's no advantage over the rest of the world there, is there? We're still going to be pegged low because they've got access to the same tools that we have. So how do we measure that against the rest of the world? It's not necessarily going to uplift us, surely.
So great question, wonderful, and I purposefully actually spent not that much of my time talking about AI because I reckon AI is going to be every other session you're talking about. But let's go there. So you're right. In principle, the technology will be available, and it might be available to everyone. But I think, firstly, if we can be sort of rapid adopters who use it to fix some of the problems more quickly, we've got, that would be helpful. I think the other feature of this story is we are showing promise in some ways in terms of being at the leading edge of building data centers. So we are actually, if you look at the pipeline of data center build out globally, the US is dominating it. 75% of the data center build out's happening there. But we are third or fourth, depending on how you rank it in terms of dollar spend. And as a proportion of our economy, as a proportion of GDP, we are clearly second as a proportion of the amount of GDP for the spend that's going on in the data center build out. And I guess the hopeful part of me says we're building data centers because that's going to allow us to have more compute and more tokens onshore, and that's then going to facilitate, one, a tech sector which is growing quite quickly in Australia. It's small, it's only about 1% of GDP, but it's growing quite quickly. Software license exports rose 22-fold over the past 10 years to $10 billion last year. We've got a tech sector that's burgeoning. But then hopefully we'll also see that businesses will, and this is you, businesses will find ways to adopt better practices using AI that streamline their cost base and improve their productivity and so on. That bit is still a question rather than an answer. Every big business has got a plan, a strategy to adopt AI, but it's not exactly clear how that's going to happen. On the small business surveys, actually, we've been a bit slow. There's a key one that the government runs, and over half of small and medium-sized enterprises, which I might add, employ about 70% of the employees in Australia, but over half of them are saying they have no AI ideas or they're not looking at adopting AI at all. 6% of them say they're using it actively, 18% of them say they're looking into using it more actively, and so on. So we're a bit slow on those surveys at this point, but we're building the capacity seemingly to do it. So if we do move faster, there was a time, certainly in the early 2000s, where the studies would show that we are actually quite rapid adopters of new technologies. We're not necessarily the developers of technologies, but we're rapid adopters of them. So that could be something that could help us to move along. There is also a less positive possibility here that we're building a lot of data centers that they're being built by multinationals that take their profits offshore. It draws a lot of energy and a lot of water out of the local system and lifts the cost of local energy and sort of adds to our competitiveness challenge in other industries as well. These are valid points of view, and I think that we're still yet to see exactly how this is going to play out. But that's, there are possibilities. If you're interested in reading my research while I'm up here and I can advertise, hop on LinkedIn. If you're not already on my LinkedIn, there's a lot of my reports that end up there. If you're an HSBC client, a corporate client, I can put you on my distribution list. But I wrote a little piece about a month ago. I called it Parallel Data Centers and the Liquefied Natural Gas Boom. And just drew a parallel between, we're building a lot of data centers right now. Turns out in the early 2000s, we built a lot of liquefied natural gas plants. They were built by multinationals. They drew a lot of energy out of the system. They sold a gas to the global market and lifted up the local gas price and sort of limited the competitiveness, lifted the energy price locally. And the question, in retrospect, is did we get as much benefit out of all of that as we should hope we would have? And again, it's a question. And does the data center story look like that? Or is the data center story going to properly actually improve our competitiveness? Because the tokens are going to be primarily used to help us to improve our business practices. And again, good policy would help you get there as well.
Thank you, Paul. We've got a question over here.
Hey, Paul. Katya Forbes, independent advisor about agentic economy. I was in China earlier this year and met with some senior execs from Alibaba who said that the way they were thinking about output and productivity was originally the human power that they had versus times by the efficiency as humans that they could get. But they've changed their equation to be human power times that same efficiency times the number of AI agents that they can manage. I'm really curious as to whether or not that type of equation scans for you and how you're thinking about that when we have agents as actors inside the economy, actors inside the business. Is that a force multiplier for the types of equations that you're using to think about productivity?
That's a great question, and it's a really deep one as well. It makes me wonder, so the output of an AI that might be communicating. I don't know. I think you've written a book on the, machines selling things to machines. So in the sense that so there you go. There's a plug. No, but I mean, so how do you then measure, when we talk about GDP and final output, that output is the output of a machine equivalent to the output, and so on. So it's a very, very deep question. I mean, the other one is, how do we count the sale of tokens? We are these data centers are going to export tokens to the world. That's in principle a service export, and we can count them because the price of the token is the price of the output. I guess that's right. But is information, which is what we're really talking about, and sort of algorithmic information in a way, is that what you'd call output? Yeah. Yeah. So this is the essence of productivity, right? I mean, if you want to go to the extreme, this is the Elon Musk point, right? Which is that, oh, well, robotics are going to come along and they're going to do everything for us. Algorithms, AI is going to actually do it all for us. Actually, we're not going to have to worry because everything's going to be produced for us. And that's sort of an extreme position. I guess the immediate question in my mind is, if everything can produce for us, and then therefore your labour isn't worth anything, how are we all going to get a return from this? How is anyone going to get a return from this, aside from the people who own the AI and the technology? And that's, I guess, where you get into much, much bigger questions about distribution and so on. I've been happy to think about that in a sort of broader sense, but sort of put it aside for the moment, because actually the near-term story is we're still working out how this is going to improve, nuts and bolts of how we operate. And the first thing that's happened, which I find really fascinating, is there are quite a few examples at the moment of businesses who've run headlong into AI and realised that the cost of tokens is so high that they've had to slow down the amount they're spending on AI and reconsider that hiring decision, because they've said, well, actually, it might be cheaper to keep on the people I've got doing these practices than actually buy the tokens at the moment because of a shortage of tokens. It might be might be more reasonable for me to still offshore this role to the Philippines or to India, because actually the cost of tokens to do this role, it's cheaper to hire the person doing, and so on. So we're still in really that early stage. The optimists, or the big picture thinkers, would say, well, once we've built enough data centers, and maybe off in space, who knows, we'll get enough tokens that the price will fall so much that actually that won't be the constraint. But I would say right now, what's happening is the price mechanism, which is my favorite spot because I'm an economist, is revealing how you make these decisions for the moment, which is, it costs you a bit more to do this, you're going to do this, and that's going to slow down the process and hopefully protect jobs for the moment. I know I haven't quite answered your question, in part because it's really difficult. It's a very high-level question to sort of try and take on. But statistics bureaus, measures of GDP, they'll evolve over time to capture what is the new way of thinking about how we measure these things in terms of what they mean for living standards.
Thank you for that. We've got one more question down the front.
Yeah. Hi, Paul.
Here? Yeah.
Dean Swan from Monday.com. As I walk down the retail strip, you see a lot of office spaces and shop fronts for lease. Are we in a K-shaped economy? And then what's the implication of that for Australia?
Yeah. So, they're going to be winners and then people at the bottom who are really struggling and so on. I think this is usually this is an expression that's used to explain the US economy at the moment. I think it matches their conditions a bit closer. I mean, not entirely, but you've got this tech story that's enormous. The whole owners of the tech story, the wealth, are doing very well, but at the same time, bottom end of town is facing higher tariffs and higher costs and higher inflation, and so you've got more of this sort of feeding through in the US. Most of the metrics say that Australia's got lower income inequality than we have in a lot of other places, including in the US. We have got a big sort of social security system that provides support. We've got a minimum wage that's one of the highest in the world. Bottom end actually gets a lot of support from those things. And we've got an unemployment rate, I think this is probably the fundamental thing, that's low at 4.4%. That tends to help and protect us through these various events. But the story going forward is, what does this new technology shock mean in terms of, are the benefits going to be unevenly shared? And I'll wrap up on this, but this is, we've had technology shocks in the past, big ones, right? I mean, they've come along, right? The Industrial Revolution, the arrival of electricity, the arrival of the motor vehicle, the arrival of the PC, the arrival of the internet, and there's some great economic historians, literature that's been written, historians who've spent their careers just writing about these things, which is great for the rest of us because we can learn what the lessons they've learned. And there are sort of patterns in those stories where, you know, it is the case that when big technology, big shifts come along, often there are a bunch of people who win and a bunch of people who lose. And one of the ones that I always like to relay, or things that I like to relay, is this is what Charles Dickens wrote all about, right? I mean, this is what all of his books were about, is about the fact that the Industrial Revolution came along, the factory owners did very well, and the factory workers did very poorly. In fact, they were a whole lot worse off as a result of that. Had that not come along, they wouldn't have been as worse off as they were. They were worse off than they would have otherwise been. And so I guess the prerogative here, the primary prerogative, is that policymakers need to be taking the right steps, seeing this coming and doing what they can to make sure we get the policy settings right, globally, locally, about information, about who owns it, and all this sort of stuff. And that's not going to be an easy task. It's going to be tough, and it may very well be that it drives more of a wedge. We're probably, I guess, my primary message would be the wedge is a lot smaller in Australia than it is in other places in general. But I'm not saying it won't get tougher. It could get tougher over time. I hope that's helpful. I covered as much material as I could, and I didn't bring slides along so that I could move faster, and that's what I did. And I'm hoping that the rest of your sessions will be really useful for, as I say, tackling what I think is Australia's biggest economic challenge.
Everyone, please give Paul a big round of applause. Well done, mate. Really well. They said when Paul comes on, everyone's going to have questions, and I saw so many hands up, and I do apologise that we couldn't get to everyone, but we've got a jam-packed schedule here today. Did anyone see the IKEA example recently around, yeah? If you didn't, they were going to replace 8,500 employees due to AI. And instead of replacing them, they trained them up as interior designers, which then has unlocked $1.4 billion worth of revenue for them. So whilst the headwinds may be there, it is also our opportunity to step in and start thinking a little bit differently around what our businesses could be in the future as well. So don't always think about the headwinds as being something that we have to reduce, and could be something that leads to another opportunity if we start thinking in a bit more of a different perspective. But now it's time for you, in your tables, to have discussions. For the even and odd number tables, so the odd number tables, table 1 and etc. to the evens. We're going to pose 2 questions on screen. Can we got those? So if you're on the odd table, your question is, what are your biggest barriers to lifting productivity? And for the even tables, where do you see your biggest productivity opportunity? Let's have a discussion now, and I'm going to take a microphone around very shortly and just see what some of the outcomes that we have. Over to you. 3 minutes left for the table discussions.
If you want to walk around with it up,
Just keep it up. Otherwise I'll forget. Thanks, mate. We have 1 minute to go. 1 minute. Okay, everyone, if we can start wrapping up the conversations, please. We're just going to get the perspective of the tables now. Thank you, everyone. Can I have a hand up from someone on an odd table to share what perspectives were shared on their table and anything that they would like to share with the rest of the room? So if you're on an odd table, the question was, what are your biggest barriers to lifting productivity? Can I see a hand from someone from an odd table over here? Yes. Over to you, Anne. Oh, who's doing it?
Thank you. I've been stitched up here, but away I'll go.
If you can say your name.
Glenn Cushion's Syndicate 62. We talked about a barrier to lifting productivity being that mindset as a business operator in terms of revenues under pressure, there's pressure on costs, regulation, compliance, etc. So perhaps that's a barrier in the first instance. Is this going to cost us more? The other thing that was mentioned at the table as well, or one of the other things that was mentioned at the table was systems and where you're at the moment, and again, the cost of upgrading your systems, the implementation, aligning the workforce. So none of that is impossible, but it certainly could be a barrier in the first instance to that productivity decision in that space. Will that do?
Thank you. All right, now for the even number, can I have a hand up? Where do you see your biggest productivity opportunity? Great.
Thank you. We sort of split our conversation around two aspects. One was the operation of the business, and the other is the product that the business might produce. So we saw opportunities in using AI agents to defragment tools and currently disconnected processes for better, easier reporting, so to reduce some of that time taken there. And then the other was redesigning the work that we actually do and going into services that we may not already be in. There's also a bit of discussion about risk management, using the tools to analyze project risk or product risk and reduce the hours needed in that area as well. So the question that we had at the end of all of that was, is there a market there for this new created productivity that we've done? But that's a completely different and bigger question.
Thank you. Big round of applause there too. We're going to have another table conversation very, very shortly, but right now I have the absolute privilege to be welcoming in our next guests around Pillar 1, around aligning strategy with execution. Now, Dean Swan leads Monday.com's business across Asia Pacific and Japan, having joined as the region's first hire and driven its growth towards the 9-figure mark in just a few years. He brings over a decade of leadership experience from Microsoft and a stint as Dropbox ANZ's country manager, giving him a deep understanding of how organisations actually get the work done. In his keynote today, Dean tackles the gap between strategy and execution, sharing practical approaches for building teams and systems that turn ambitious plans into real, measurable results. Dean Swan, give him a round of applause.
Good to meet you as well. It's a great introduction and, again, a very hard act to follow with Paul. I thoroughly enjoyed the economic comments and then as well with Darren just making an introduction. So I'm a newbie to the CEO Institute, so I'm part of Syndicate 65, so looking forward to meeting Syndicate 65 and spending some time together. I joked this morning, and the CEO Institute just gets up really early, I think, to be here at 7:30. I wonder whether I joined the right institute. I thought the Chairman Institute maybe gets in at 10. So maybe I'll speak to Mary about that. Look, today I really focus on how can I bring value to all of you peers in the concept of driving strategy through to execution. But more importantly, a framework around how you can think about and you can apply AI-led transformation to each one of your organizations, irrespective of the size of your company or what industry you are in. And I think Richard framed it really well. It's a leadership conversation. It's not a technology conversation. And in the 25 years that I've been in the technology industry, many years at Microsoft working with government organizations, some of the largest organizations and companies in Australia, through to the work that I do at Monday.com, connecting with some of Japan's largest organizations and working with government institutes and universities in Singapore, working with companies like Hyundai in South Korea. I get a very broad exposure to companies and industries of all sizes across the region. But fundamentally, they all have the same challenges, the same issues, irrespective of the size. So hopefully you'll get some value out of that today. Now, I've got a couple of notes. I'm not going to pace the stage here. I am a bit of a pacer. Let's see, make sure that aligns well there. So let's jump into it. And before I jump into the framework, I do want to frame and recognize the environment that we all working in as leaders. I'll get through the blue steel image there. All right. Oh, you get a double version of that. Okay, there we go. VUCA. You might hear I've got a bit of a slight South African accent. It's not a Zulu word that I'm trying to put out there, but it's an acronym for the environment that we are all operating in as leaders. We are operating in an environment that's characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that really is driven by the market changes, the global events, the changes in tax policy and legislation, the advancements in technology. There's a lot there that we have to contend with, and it's created a really complex environment for us to operate in. I'll share my own leadership experience. 3 weeks ago, I flew to Singapore and we had our quarterly business review with our leadership team. It was off the back of an incredibly successful quarter. We had a record quarter. In fact, we had beaten our previous best quarter by 20%. On every single metric across the business in our region, we were standout leaders across the globe. So when I think about our top line revenue, I think about our customer retention. As a company that is going through its own transformation of its products and offerings in the world of AI and driving that as a new opportunity, we were leading the way. I landed, I got into my hotel room at 6 p.m. and I was preparing for the 2-day QBR that we were going to have starting the next day. At 10 p.m. I got a call from our Chief People Officer and she said, "Dean, we're about to announce a 25% reduction in our workforce." And a couple of minutes later, I had a call with our Chief Revenue Officer, my boss, and he said, "Here's your envelope for APJ." And I was just floored. I was like, just such a jarring conversation to go from having a record performance to now needing to take that forward and think about, well, how am I going to reorganize our team? How am I going to have these very difficult conversations with people, which, by the way, over the last 6 years, we've built a very successful business, right? When we started Monday.com in this region, it was, for all intents and purposes, an unknown brand, right? And we've built a company that now has 30,000 customers across Australia and New Zealand, used by companies like Westpac, as Darren mentioned, Qantas, Wesfarmers, a lot of the brands and organizations that we know and we interact with every single day. So we're successful. We're a company in this region driving $200 million worth of revenue every single year with 200 employees. So our productivity, our revenue per head count, I think is very high. But I now have to react because the world is changing incredibly fast, and as leaders, we have to move incredibly fast, and it's difficult, it's complex, so I just want to recognize that. The other thing is at a personal level, at a people level, at a human level, we're working in an environment where ourselves and our employees, I'd say that modern work isn't working, it's broken. You've heard about this in some of the conversations. We have this dichotomy where on the one hand, we have employee burnout on the rise, and on the other hand, we've got productivity on the decline. Many of us are working longer hours than we've ever worked before. There is this blur between our work life and our personal lives. This morning, my morning started at 6 a.m. with a call with my boss, and it'll end at midnight tonight with another meeting and another conversation. So very long days, right? So forgive me if I tire out a little bit during the conversation. So just someone might need to prompt me. So I think that just frames it up in terms of what we're trying to work through, the dynamic environment, and also the impact on our people. And as Paul mentioned there, the productivity, for the most part, has flatlined, and in the last 10 years has declined. So we have a real challenge. But we also have this spark of opportunity and something that we can all latch onto and leverage in our organizations, which is AI. And it is the biggest technology innovation we will experience in our lifetimes. I started my university career here in Australia. I studied what was AI 20 years ago. So I was writing speech recognition and machine language systems and building systems that allowed you to move things around with your voice in terms of your bank transfers, and also doing intelligent document processing and all the things that we now are just mainstream as far as AI is concerned. So I've had a long journey with AI over the last 25 years, and it's amazing to see the progress and the advancement and the pace of that and being able to harness it. So what we do see, though, is that at an individual level, 71% of people feel like they're getting value out of AI, but it's not necessarily translating to organizational-wide benefit, right? So many people report that they feel like they're more productive. AI is doing a lot of the grunt work for them, but that's not necessarily translating to organizational-wide benefits. And so the challenge is, how do we have that value compound across our teams, across our organizations, and we can really affirm that AI is bringing business-level benefits. I did a bit of research yesterday. I thought, let me share some examples of where AI is working, and I'd say in some areas where it's backfiring. And again, just recognize we're very early into this journey. This headline stat really stood out for me. I think this was something that was reported in a couple of news publications over the last couple of weeks, where Uber recognized that they had burned through their entire AI budget in 4 months, right? And then the CEO was commenting that he was questioning whether or not they got the value out of that. So there's a lot of talk in the media, and I'm sure talk within your own organizations it's around the tokenomics. Are we getting the tangible return on investment in how much we're spending on AI tokens? One of the dads at my daughter's school, we were having a beer the other day. He's the CFO of a very well-known, successful VC investment company. And I asked him, I said, what's your budget? How much are you guys spending on AI? He said, well, $150,000. Now, for all intents and purposes, this is a small business. I think they've got maybe 15, 20 employees in their organization. I said, that is a hell of a lot of budget for AI. I don't even think they'd be spending that much on their financial system or their CRM system. So it's probably their number one technology spend. And I asked him, so what's the ROI you're getting on it? And he said, well, it's just a big experiment. I'm just giving it to everyone, and we're trying to figure things out. And I think that is the reality, is many organizations are in this ball pit, experimenting with AI and trying to find what's the thing that's going to stick for us and what's the thing that is meaning for us. But what's working? Here's a couple of great examples. If I look at what's working, JP Morgan, a very narrow use case where they've applied AI for their contract reviews, and they're saving over 350,000 lawyer hours a year, which would be meaningful return for them as an organization. Walmart, where they created an AI agent that is a shopping assistant, and they've got a great A/B test where they see that where people are using the shopping assistant, the average basket size is 35% larger. It's connected into their inventory, the supply chain, and then also making recommendations on things that would sort of complement that, and versus where people aren't using that AI agent. Bank of America, using it internally for a lot of their HR ticketing, IT ticketing, and they see significant productivity gains internally within their organization. And then Shell, applying it from a predictive maintenance perspective, and they're seeing a $400 million a year savings from the application of AI, and then a reduction on their safety incidences of 15%. So really meaningful ROI and benefits that these organizations are seeing. On the flip side, and you heard a little bit of that, is where organizations have cut staff. Klarna cut 700 people and then had to have a bit of a rethink moment in terms of bringing people back because the AI hadn't delivered on what they were expecting for it to deliver. Starbucks, again, overreached on their customer experience and investment in AI, and the new incoming CEO has said that that is their number one issue that they need to fix, is the customer experience, right? So it's not all going swimmingly, and I'm going to highlight this framework that you might see why. Why isn't it going that way? But here's what the patterns that are emerging is the winners have scoped a few high-value workflows, and they're applying their AI-led transformation to those high-value workflows. They've got real infrastructure behind that, real change management behind that. I'd say the losers, maybe that's a bit of a harsh word, but the ones that are still learning, is they've gone straight down to, I'd say, the lowest common denominator. Let's use AI just to cut people out of the organization, and haven't thought through that really well. And then that's where they're seeing that that's backfiring for them. I'd say another part that I'd highlight is the need and the importance to map out your standard operating procedures, right? Getting to the heart of your business, map out those workflows, and then that's where you apply AI. Because the one thing that AI will do is if you've got bad workflows and you've got bad standard operating procedures, it's going to amplify that, right? If you've got good workflows and good standard operating procedures, then it will likely bring benefits to your organization. All right, so how do organizations move from individual AI gains to org-wide AI gains? And I'd say, again, most AI transformations right now are bottom-up experiments, right? We're giving our teams broad access to AI capabilities, but we really are lacking a tangible ROI from that because we don't have that strategic direction top-down. And that's why I'd say it's framed really well because it's a leadership conversation, it's not a technology conversation. And the common causes around where we're not seeing that tangible ROI at an organization level, too many pilots, not a path to enterprise scale, poor data, as Darren mentioned, poor context, poor systems integration. The measures of success, many organizations are measuring success as, well, how many tokens are we using and how many people are using it, rather than what's the revenue outcome that we're driving, what's the margin, what's the capacity that we're creating in our business, right? And so, let's jump on to the next bit. And this is the framework. And I mean, this is a framework that I've applied over 25 years, and I said, whether that's a digital transformation or an AI-led transformation, whether it's a large state government agency, whether it is a financial institution, whether it's a large retailer, a mid-sized company, a small business, I think you can take this and you can apply it. And again, it starts with the leadership team really driving a clear business-led strategy. It's not an experiment, it's a clear business-led strategy, and starting with very sharp answers to, I'd say, these three questions. What business problem are we solving? Number one. Where will we go deep first? Number two. And then number three, what outcomes do we expect? So what are we solving for? Where will we go deep first? And then what outcomes do we expect, right? And the CEOs, the people in this room, and the business leaders need to set that direction. It cannot just be exclusively a bottoms-up experiment, right? And I'm not saying that there isn't value in that. In fact, you probably want both. You want a top-down strategy, but that marries up with a bottoms-up experiment because you need to bring people along on that journey and you want to enable your teams. So let's start. Many organizations, in my experience, are typically transforming one of four things. And I think that captures probably 95% of all the transformation and all the efforts. You're either transforming your workforce or your employee experience, you're transforming your operations and your business workflows, you're transforming your customer experience and your go-to-market, or you're transforming your products, which is the case of Monday.com and many companies in the software industry, or you're transforming your systems, your business systems and the tools that the people are working with. Those typically sum up, I'd say, 95% of the transformation agenda. So the first one I've put here, and I'd actually wouldn't start here necessarily because I think this is the hardest one, And I think many organizations have actually started, a bit of a blunt instrument. We're going to bring in AI, we're going to lay off 100 people, we're going to get more efficient with AI. But workforce transformation, I think it was alluded to over here, is how do we shift from a labor-based operating model to a hybrid human-agent model? Because that is the future. The future is where you're going to have humans and agents working together, right? I'll give you an example. So at Monday.com, we've got a team of what we call sales development reps. So there's basically a team that respond to inbound inquiries. So if someone signs up for a trial of Monday.com or they put in their contact details, we've got a bunch of people that will reach out to you, they will call you, they'll email you, and they'll start the sales conversation, right? But what we found as an organization, to grow, we had to keep on growing this team. We had to add more and more people to fuel our growth. And about a year ago, we developed AI agents. So we developed 2 agents. One was called Jax and one was called Amanda. So if you put in your phone details today, most likely you'll get a call from our AI agents. And the AI agent is just really having a short, sharp conversation with you to understand, well, what's brought you to Monday? What problem are you looking to solve? And let's help you set up a meeting with one of our team members, right? That's what they do, right? We've managed to keep our SDR team more or less flat. We haven't had to grow our headcount, right? But we've got this agent that is now doing a bit of that process. So it's a good example of agents and humans working together. For me, the conversion rate benchmark is when I have a person does that, they're normally converting from an inbound lead to an opportunity is about 33%. So as long as that agent can meet that benchmark, then I say, look, we're in a good enough place. I had a look at it on Monday. I think Andy might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was like 34, 35%. So the agent has now pulled up. I think this is going to be a reality for many organizations where you're going to have to shift from just a purely labor-based operating model to a hybrid human-agent operating model. Again, workforce transformation now is going back and doing the work and rethinking what do jobs look like? Because a job role is just a bundle of jobs to be done and tasks. So how much of that is going to be done by agent and how much is going to be done by human? So I think that's reshaping jobs, it's reshaping capabilities, it's reshaping your organizational structure, which is what we're doing. And so how do humans and agents create more value than either could alone? And again, just emphasizing that it's not just automation or headcount reduction. I think that's a zero-sum game. It's about thinking about how do you redeploy, how do you redefine your organization, how do you redefine the roles. And that's why I said I think this is the hardest place to start because it requires a lot of work and I think it requires a lot of rework. Measures of success, output per FTE, sounds like the productivity equation there. Span of control. For us as Monday, as I said, we've gone through a reduction of workforce. One of the things that is a measure of success for me is how many people can a manager manage now, right? So we went from a ratio of 1 to 5, and now we've got a span of control where we're moving to 1 to 8, right? And then that means that we do actually have less middle management layers, but we've got more efficiency around that. The next is the operations transformation. And this is the one that I'd highlight. I mean, this is the one I think where a lot of the ROI sits at the moment and where these quick wins can be had, right? But many organizations don't have really clearly defined workflows. And when I say clearly defined, it's not documented. I think it's a little bit of the IP living in people's heads, or you don't have clearly defined standard operating procedures. So how do you redesign your business processes, your decision logic, and then the human system integrations, right? And it's not just automating a few tasks or adding co-pilots to existing projects or processes. Here's the question I typically ask leaders is, what are the 3 processes or workflows in your company, your organization that drive the most enterprise value? Because I think if you can hone in on that and you can make that process more intelligent, more efficient, get more throughput for that, that's where you're going to get the best bang for buck in terms of your ROI investment, right? A number of years ago, as an example, I had lunch with one of the executives of Mirvac, and I asked him, I said, Paul, just think about it. What are the 3 processes that drive the most enterprise value for Mirvac? And straight away he said, look, the first one is our lease renewal process, right? That drives the most enterprise value for us. And I said, okay, well, think about that process. How disjointed is it? How inefficient is it? Do you have siloed systems? Are there elements that are broken? And he knew where all the problems were. He's like, yep, that. So I said, okay, well, just focus there. If you could solve that process and you can make that process more efficient, that's where you're going to get the most meaningful upside in terms of the enterprise value. So for you, it might be your order to cash claims, your supply chain, your maintenance, but just think about how can AI materially improve speed, quality, reliability, scalability, and I think if you just did that one thing, that's where a lot of the action is. So measures of success there: faster cycle times, cost to serve, throughput. I bucketed these 2 up. GTM, so go to market, think about your sales and your marketing, and then CX. I think we use that a lot in the tech industry, so CX just stands a lot for customer experience, customer support, and so on. So for GTM transformation, it means reworking how AI can allow your company to identify demand, how you can personalize marketing, how you can drive conversion, how you can prioritize which customers to focus on. And again, it's not just about adding a co-pilot to marketing or sales. Your support or CX transformation, that means redesigning the end-to-end customer experience across service, support, retention, and expansion. And how does AI anticipate needs? How does it drive personalization? How does it resolve issues faster? And how does it orchestrate the next best action? So I've got a very salient example. 2 weeks ago, I've got an Oura Ring, which is like a fitness tracking device. The battery is faulty, so like I'd charge it and then within a day or a couple of hours, the battery's run out. Most of you know it's a pain to do a return. Like you actually don't want to go through that process because you've got to explain what's wrong and then you've got to just jump through a whole lot of hoops. I went online, they had a chatbot called Finn, and I just said, yeah, I've got an issue with my Oura battery. It didn't ask me to explain what's going on. It just said, what's the email address associated with the account? I said, it's this. It went back and it looked at the logs and it said, yeah, I can see that there's an issue with your battery and that it's faulty. We'll replace it for you. By the way, we don't have the original color that you ordered, so it's black or silver. Which would you like? I said, okay, I'll take a black one. Great. In 1 to 2 weeks, you'll receive that in the mail. Resolved, 5 minutes, and what a great experience. There was no friction in it. I didn't have to explain myself all that much, and so that's a great example of AI driving a customer experience where I got to a resolution, and they're probably doing that in a very low cost to serve manner as well. So again, I think measures of success: conversion, retention rate, your seller productivity, your customer retention. And then lastly, again, I bucketed this in 2 directions here, is products and tech transformation. So product transformation for a company like Monday, it's really about our new product development. And so many people know Monday as a project management offering, but how do we, and we've been transforming as a company into an AI workspace and an AI platform, right? And so we've been applying AI to drive that code development and faster cycle times. But I think even if you're a non-tech company, how do you use AI to drive your new product development process, right? I work with companies like Toyota in Japan, and they use AI-led PMO to reduce the cycle times for their new product development, and they're putting 3 to 4x more products into the market because they're using AI for that new product development cycle. A really interesting story that I heard was about 2 years ago. We brought in a AI work futurist, and he spoke about L'Oreal. And L'Oreal ran an experiment where they, instead of going to their agency for new product development and research, they used AI. And the AI went and did a bit of research in the market, and it found a niche that wasn't being serviced. It was for goth makeup, and they found that there was a certain, demographic. My daughter loves Vampire Diaries, so I think that's probably where it was coming from. And they said, you can make this product. It created the name of the product, the positioning of the product. It created the socials. It published it on the socials. And L'Oreal sold that product out in 45 hours, right? So that was completely driven by AI, market research, branding, where to publish it, where to market it, and so on. So I think there's some creative examples of where AI can really drive that new product development. In terms of technology transformation, I think a gentleman over here mentioned it. It's like, it's very expensive to upgrade your systems, integrate your systems, and so on. And AI has definitely lowered that barrier. I think with vibe coding, we see companies can modernize their systems really quickly now. We had an example. ASICS is one of our customers. The team shared it with us last week. There was a gentleman in their warehouse. They've got a piece of barcode system. The data is siloed, and they had a limitation. They can only print out 20 barcodes per day. He got on Monday with Monday Vibe, and he vibe coded a barcode application in 20 minutes. He had 4 iterations. And this is someone in the warehouse, not a technical expert, that was able to build a system that overcame a barrier that they had for a long time. So I think there's real gains in terms of being able to modernize your systems, break down those barriers, and leverage AI to really uplift what I'd say the technology backbone. Measures of success there: time to launch, growth, time to value. Darren mentioned this a bit, but I think those are the 4 pillars that I'd say you could frame for AI transformation. Where we're going to start, where we're going to go deep, but you also have to have these enablers, right? I think these are the foundational things that need to be in place, which is data, context, governance, security, and risk. Table stakes. I don't think you can go on this journey and realize your ROI with AI if you're not doing these things. It's not about exotic models and advanced tooling. They do help, but I think these are the foundational things. It's just making sure from a data perspective, most AI programs stall because the data is messy, it's trapped in silos. How do you have a unified data foundation that has all of your context, where you run the work, where you have all the relationships, the history, and it's secure and it scales? Context, look, AI gives the best outputs when it has situational awareness. It's got the business knowledge, it's got the relationships, it understands what's happening in your organization, and it can bring all of that together and produce trusted, relevant, meaningful outcomes. Governance, again, clear ownership around this, clear ownership around access, rules, people who can do what, who can spend all of the tokens. Like we see that, you've got one expert and then they've spent all of your AI token budget. So how do you distribute that to where that means something? And then the security and the risk, which is obviously the cyber security, the legal exposure, all of the things that I think you need to think through as business leaders to make sure you've got that foundation in place and that you can scale. So look, I think with something to take back, right? I think 3 things, folks. Number 1 is pick your pillar. It can be one, it can be all, but I think just really focus on thinking inside the square, like what of these matters most? What's going to drive our strategy as a company? What's going to drive our outcomes? And good strategy is quite simple. It's grounded on one of 2 things. It's grounded on either an opportunity or problem that you need to solve. So where can AI drive an opportunity for us, or where can it solve a problem for us? Second, I think review those enablers. Really think quite carefully through the data, through context, through governance, security, and risk. If you can't do that yourselves, I'd say partner with an organization that is really thinking about that space. And then the last one is, don't lose the bottoms-up groundswell. You want that. You want your teams invested in it. You want your teams understanding those tools. But lead it top-down and bottom-up, and just get that alignment of your strategy through to your execution so that you can deliver those outcomes for your business. And I'm an optimist as well. You know, I see enormous opportunity for AI to bring tangible outcome to businesses, not just individual outcomes and productivity, but really at a business level that can reshape business P&Ls and can help build resilience, scalability, and hopefully address some of the productivity challenges that we do see as an organization, as a company, a country, shall I say. All right, well, thank you very much anyway. One thing. I'll be berated by my marketing team if I didn't do a little bit of a plug. So you will see on each table there's a little coaster here with a QR code with partnership with one of our customers, Nutrition Warehouse. I think the team got some goodies out there where you can get some vitamins. I think I'm going to need some vitamins given my day started at 6 and will end at midnight. But again, thank you for listening, and hopefully you got value out of that today, and we'll be happy to share some of our content there if that's going to help you in terms of that framework as well.
Everyone give Dean Swan a big round of applause. Thank you, mate. Thank you, mate. Very practical session, that. To keep things on time, we're going to bring Doug Spahn up right now to talk about the CEO and the Pulse questions. This is an interactive bit. I'll come back at the end and we can have a little bit more about the rest of the conversations. Go. Big round of applause.
Okay, thanks, Cookie. And good morning, everyone. I trust you're enjoying your day so far today. The CEO Institute's Certified CEO Awards, or what we call CCEO, represent and mark a mark of excellence and credibility in business leadership. This prestigious credential recognises individuals with a strong foundation in business, education, extensive leadership experience, and a commitment to continuous professional growth. So we'd like to acknowledge our New South Wales members who are receiving their Certified CEO designation today. So please join me. They should be coming up very shortly, the names. So please join Warren, Claire, Rob, and Noel for achieving a significant contribution. And congratulations to all four of you. Thank you so much for the contribution you've made to the CEO Institute over the years. It's much appreciated. And now for some exciting audience participation. In January 2026 summits, we had 798 of our 1,000+ members participate in one of the largest CEO surveys conducted in Australia. Not another boardroom survey, not another academic study. This is 798 real CEOs leading real businesses, telling us in real time what's actually happening. And that's exactly the kind of insight shaping the productivity conversation that we're having today. And our member insights help inform and educate the wider business community. So I'm going to encourage you all to participate. Now, we all have a phone. I know everybody has a phone. So if you could get your phones out, please, that would be much appreciated. What we're going to do, there is a QR code that will come up on the screen right now. It is your last chance, so please do participate. This is really, really important because this helps shape the future narrative. So get your QR codes into your phones, and we're going to ask a number of questions that we would like you to contribute to this morning. Give you a little moment to do all of that, and then we'll get on to the first question. Everybody okay? All right. So, the first question. Where do you believe the greatest productivity loss occurs in your organisation today? I'll give you a moment or two. Systems, processes, kicking on. People. People, incredibly important. Yep. System is people by a long shot. Fantastic. Thank you for that. Second question. How effectively does your organisation translate strategy into day-to-day execution? Somewhat effectively? Oh. Inconsistently? It's pretty consistent with what we're hearing during the course of today. Wow. Heavily on individual leaders and teams. Absolutely. Great. Question 3. What is the biggest barrier preventing your organisation from lifting productivity over the next 12 months? Legacy systems. Yep. Too many competing priorities. Different priorities, legacy systems. Great, thank you. Question number 4. What is the biggest people-related constraint on productivity in your organisation today? Leaders and managers stretched too thin. Wow. Skills and capability, not keeping pace with technology. Okay, leaders, skills, capability. Wow, thank you. Question number 5. How would you describe your organisation's current approach to AI and productivity? Lots of experimenting with AI. Organisation actively designing workforce or workarounds. Right. Definitely experimenting. Big number. Well, thank you very much. Okay, the last question. When thinking about AI and workforce change, what concerns you most as a CEO or business owner? Moving too slowly, losing human judgment. Absolutely. Wow. Okay, even. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your participation, everyone. I really appreciate it. So, Cookie, I'm going to hand back to you.
Thank you, everyone. Give Doug a round of applause. We're about to go ahead to morning tea. So you can go fill your tummies, go to the toilet, get a coffee, etc. We missed out on the table conversation because we've got to, bring this back on time. I am going to put both of the questions up here though, and this is what I'd love you to think about and have conversations with when you're out at morning tea. So the questions that we were proposing is, where is the biggest opportunity to align strategy with execution, and what work design changes would you lift productivity fastest? So go and enjoy morning tea. We're going to be back here right on time at 10:45. But just consider these questions as you're having conversations with your peers. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.